Good morning. Good morning. Hope you're having a good morning. Hope you had a great week, and I'm glad you're here this morning. Real quick, just one quick like housekeeping thing that I want to talk about just for a second is we've got some. If you haven't been around the last few weeks and really the last about 3 months, we've had some significant growth trends in the size of our church, which is a great problem. We'll take that. And it's going well, and that's a good thing. One of the things we're growing in most, though, and one of the areas we're growing most in, is in our kids and in Restoration Kids. We're growing with babies, with toddlers, with elementary age kids. That's a huge thing right now that we're seeing. And honestly, if we're going to grow this church in this community, that's where we're going to grow. If you haven't paid attention to the demographics of especially Trinity, right now it's one of the few places in Florida that is trending in the next 5 years to get younger. Most of Florida gets older. I don't know if you, for some reasons. And this is one area that's actually getting younger because younger families are moving into this area. And so if we're going to grow, we're going to have great stuff for kids going on and have really incredible things that we can do for our kids. Really, as one of our values of community, what we see the Restoration Kids stuff being is a community for kids. And so maybe you're here and you're like, I would help with that, but I'm not like a teacher. I don't really feel like comfortable teaching. That's totally fine. What we're looking for is people who will like play Battleship with an 8-year-old or color with a 5-year-old or just hold some babies, that kind of thing, which I love to go back there. Every time I'm not preaching and I'm in town, that's where I go. I go back to Restoration Kids instead of preaching or teaching. I go back there and just hang out with the kids because I think it's a really important thing for us. So if you're here today and you're like, man, I would love to maybe just do that, or even just like I can go play Battleship with kids. I can hang out with kids. We would love to do that because what we'd love to do is break up our Restoration students even more than kind of what it is a little bit, or our Restoration Kids. Right now what we have nursery, pre-K, and elementary, which has been great, and that's fine. We'd love to get us to a place where we even have what we call elementary plus, or kind of that 4th and 5th grade age, because I don't know if you've been around 4th and 5th grade. It's a weird age right now because they're not quite in middle school. They're not like elementary doesn't quite fit anymore. We'd love to get to a place where we even have that going on, which would be awesome. So if you're in that spot, that'd be great. The other thing I'd love to talk to you about real quick is Restoration Students, which is something that happens right now once a month on Sunday nights. And we get together and we have students that come and we hang out, we play games, and we do things that students like to do. The thing that I would love to have, though, is more people doing that, because we'd love to move that from once a month to once a week. We'd love that to happen every single week because we think that's really important. As we talk about a series about firm foundations, this is where they begin. Firm foundations begin when you're young. Those things that you're taught, those things that are caught when you're young, are the things that will stick with you. And we know this demographically, we know this through research, that the younger a child is, the more likely they are to follow Jesus when they make that decision when they're young. When they start that foundation young, they're more likely to continue to follow Jesus the rest of their lives. And so I think this would be a great way, if you're in that spot where you're like, I'd love to do one of those things, or both, or whatever, please talk to us. Please get involved. You can put it on your Connect card today. You can talk to Janessa or talk to me. But I think it's a really important thing for us as a community, as we continue to see this growth trend happen, that we would be able to accommodate that, and not just because we're plugging people in, but because we're investing in the community of our children and of our students. Okay, so if you feel inclined to do that, that would be great. We'll talk about that a little bit more over the next couple weeks as well. But this morning, as we continue in the Firm Foundation series, there's a couple things that I kind of want to get us into. I remember my first exposure to what we're going to talk about today. Marie and I, we got engaged it was in December. What happened was Marie thought that I was dragging my feet because it had been like 2.5 years and I had not proposed yet. We'd been dating for 2.5 years. And she was kind of like, when is this going to happen? And I had a plan. That came to me kind of quickly, but I had a plan, totally. I knew what I was doing. It was 2.5 years, and I remember there was a night, it was right before Christmas break from college, and she was going to go home to see her family, and I was I was going to be going to see my family in different parts of the country, and we were going to be splitting up. And that night she was really mad at me. Like I could feel she was like mad at me, and we were about to split up for a couple weeks. And we're sitting in her house at the time, and she was like, Kevin, like I'm not mad at you. And I was like, I know you're mad at me. You guys, you know how this goes. And I was like, what's the matter? And it was a nothing, which was going to be a something in about 3 months. You know how this goes. Like something else comes up and suddenly it was all there the whole time. And so I kept prying. And finally she breaks down tears. She's like, Kevin, it's right before Christmas break and I'm going to go home and be with my mom. And I would love to do wedding things with her, but I'm not going to do it until we're engaged. I'm not going to think about that. I'm not going to put myself in that place until we're engaged. And it would just be so nice if we were engaged. And I just thought it would happen by now. And I told her, I said, Marie, it's sooner than you think. And she goes, you've said that before, and I don't believe you anymore. But it was planned for the next day. It was literally the next day. And so what I had done was I had made this scavenger hunt. Now this was a little overkill, I'll admit, but I made a scavenger hunt across the state of Florida. It wasn't just like around town. It was literally across the state of Florida. She was going to meet up with people we had known through different parts of our relationship, and they were going to give her clues, and those clues were going to lead her to a certain place. And so she would go to like, for instance, my roommates, her roommates, whatever. That morning, her roommate woke up very early, which was not like her roommate, and came out and gave her first scroll. And it was a scroll, and inside of it had a poem to tell her something about her, and then like where she was going to go next. And every scroll had a ring on it. There were 9 rings, and it would tell her which finger to put them on until she eventually found me. And then we gave her that final ring, which, by the way, she had been putting on rings all day. So by the time she got to me, she put a ring on herself. And I was like, I had to be like, can I take it off and then ask you to marry me and then put it back on? It was an awkward moment. And so she was driving all over the state of Florida. She was seeing people from different places, different parts of our relationship. It was a really fun day. I had put a camera in her car so she could take pictures of all of this. She didn't take any pictures. But she was so happy, and she was in her own little world, and she was so happy. And so I had already gone down to a place that I had planned for the proposal to happen. And it was this place called Bethesda by the Sea. If you're familiar with it, it's in West Palm Beach. It's a building that's just gorgeous. It's this old Episcopal church that was built in 1888 by Henry Flagler. And it's just gorgeous. It's right on the water in Palm Beach, and it has this big garden in the back. And I had called them and said, could I come there and propose to my girlfriend? And they were like, oh yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to do that. And I was like, okay, great. And it's a really fancy place. And so we couldn't afford to have a wedding there, but the proposal was free. And because like literally, I think like Michael Jordan got married there one time. I think Donald Trump's first and third weddings were there. It's like, it's one of those places. But it's gorgeous. It's just like, it's a beautiful spot. And so she finally gets there. But as I'm going there, I call the church. And I said, I would just have one question, like, how do I get into the garden? It's locked, and I just need to know how to get into it. And they told me, they said, you're going to go to a door, and it's going to be on the east side of the building. And so I looked on the east side of the building. There were a bunch of doors. I was like, I don't know which one to go in. And they said, this is what they told me. They said, go to the one next to the cornerstone of the building. I'd never heard anybody say this phrase before. Like a cornerstone was new to me. I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, okay. And so I'm looking for stones, like this cornerstone. To be honest with you, a lot of stones are square, and they have corners on 4 sides. Like they got a lot of corners. So I was like, I don't know. Like, I mean, they all look like cornerstones. And they finally told me, they're like, no, it's the capstone. It's the cornerstone. And they explained it to me. And what they told me over the phone was that this is the one that has the inscription of the date it was built. It has the inscription of the builder on it. It has all the like details about how the building was built. And this cornerstone is the first stone laid. Symbolically, it's the first stone laid. Now, I didn't really understand that. I didn't really get it. But maybe you've never been around a cornerstone. Maybe you don't know what that means. But the cornerstone, from what I've read and what I've understood about it, this is the stone upon which every other stone, every part of the building, it relies on this. If this stone is set straight, if this stone is cut straight, then every other part of that building will be laid into place. And it will be straight because that stone has been put into place correctly. And every other part of the building doesn't just rely on it for the right measurements and the right places. It also relies on it to rest on it. All the other stones rest on this one stone. They rely on the stone. They rest on this stone. Now, we've been talking about this firm foundation thing, and there's this song that I love that we sang at the beginning of this series. And it's an old hymn, and if you probably know it, it's if you've been around church like I grew up in, it's called "The Solid Rock." And at the beginning of it, this song was written by a guy in 1834 who was a builder himself. He was actually a carpenter and an architect, and he wrote this song one day on his way to work. And if you're familiar with the song, it starts off and it says, "My hope is built. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. My hope is built." And then he says in the chorus, "On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is shifting sand." And then he repeats it, "All other ground is shifting sand." If you can't think of another line, you just say the same one. It's fine. And he writes this song. I love the first line of it. Because here's what I want to talk about today, is this cornerstone, this idea of this firm foundation of hope. Because I want to be honest, hope is a tricky thing. Hope is a fragile thing. It's a fickle thing. It's something that can be very frustrating, and it can fail. Hope is something that we have to be really careful with. Where are we putting our hope? Where does our hope rest? On what does our hope rely? We have to ask these questions because we can put our hope in the wrong places. And when our hope is put in the wrong places, when those things fail, when those things fall apart, when those things become failures, it feels so difficult for us to go on. I mean, maybe you're in this room and you've put your hope, if you're being honest, we've put our hope into some things that don't matter, some things that could fail us. Maybe you're here and you've put your hope in a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Maybe you've put your hope in a spouse or whatever. Maybe that's where all of your hope is. All of your hope relies on that person. And that might be where you have it today. It might be on friends, like how many friends you've got, or just popularity or relationships like that. That might be where you're putting all your hope. Maybe you're in school right now and you just feel like, if I can just get more friends and I can just get more followers, whatever that looks like, I will have all my hope secured by that. Maybe that's what you're putting all your hope on. You're trying to rest and rely on that hope. Maybe you're here in your health. Maybe your health is something that you've put all of your hope into. And all of your hope is on this one thing. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's all of your hope is in that. And maybe parents, sometimes I think we put all of our hope in our kids. And I'm not saying that's all bad, but sometimes we put all of our identity, all of our hope, all of the future of who we are on our kids, and we somehow think that that's our hope. And I think those things are fine if they're one of the building blocks of this story that we're putting together, but I don't think it's okay if they're the cornerstone. Because someday those relationships will somebody's going to desert you. Someday your spouse might fail you in some way or another. Someday your finances may not be there. Someday your health may fade. I mean, someday these things might not be what they are now, and we've made them the cornerstone of our hope. And maybe you're here today and you're like, no, I don't put my hope in anything. Like, I just don't hope in anything. That's what I do. Maybe you're like a Friedrich Nietzsche type person. Like, I don't know if you ever read like Nietzsche's stuff where, his famous line was, "God is dead." If you remember this, Friedrich Nietzsche, he was a famous philosopher, and he said, "God is dead." I remember I saw a shirt not long ago. There was a guy walking by me, and the shirt said, "God is dead," and it had the attribution to Nietzsche. And then underneath it said, "Nietzsche is dead," and it had the attribution to God, which was kind of funny, but kind of tragic. And I'm not trying to make light of it. Nietzsche did have a rough life. He was, I think, 44 when he lost his mind, and then 55 when he lost his life. But it is a fascinating thing. Like, he says God is dead, and then he had a famous quote that says that hope is the torment of mankind. Hope is a torment. And maybe you're like, no, I get that. That's the way it feels to me. Hope is something I just don't do. I would just challenge that if you're saying I don't hope in anything, if I don't put my hope in anything else, then your hope is in yourself. That's where it is. And you honestly can fail yourself. Believe it or not, and it hurts the most. It's the hardest one to recover from. I would say that our hope has to be in something greater than us, something bigger than us, something in which we can rest, and something in which we can rely on. Because everything else is going to fail us. I mean, can you imagine having a hope in something that is bigger than that? Because right now it may feel like if you lose those friends, if you lose those finances, if you lose that health, if all these things fall apart, you may feel like you'd be like, well, the world is ending, right? But can you imagine having a hope that even if the world was ending, you'd still have hope? That's a good hope to have. There's one of my favorite Twitter accounts right now is one that just is called, is it the end of the world? And every day they just put, not today, and then they tweet that out. Is it the end of the world? Not today. And they tweet that out every day. And it is reassuring. But it'd be amazing if even if the world was ending, you'd still have hope in that moment. This hope beyond just our small circumstances. This hope beyond those stones that are being built. This is a hope that you can rest and you can rely on this hope. So today I just want to look at this cornerstone idea. I want to look at where we put our hope and how delicate that is, how important that is for us. And I want to begin, so we're going to kind of skip through a bunch of scripture here. I'm just going to warn you. We're going to go like all over the place and just kind of see where we land with this mess of things. But I want to start with this idea of the cornerstone and actually how important this becomes in the scripture. If you want to, again, we're going to skip through the Bible quite a bit because this becomes a big theme. If you want to, though, you're welcome to turn. It's Psalm 118 is where we're going to begin. And in Psalm 118, there's this psalm. It's a song. And the song has this wonderful line about where we're putting our hope. And so this is a song written by a guy named David. David is the king of Israel at this time. And notice this first line. Just hold on to this first line for a second. This is what it says. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Now this line, remember this line for later. But this line is a big one, and David comes out with it. Maybe you've heard other songs written out of this song. Maybe you've heard hymns written out of this line right here. But give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. And then the next part, he's going to start to talk about where these Israelites, the people who are going to sing this song, where they're putting their hope. And this is what he says. It says, let Israel say, his love endures forever. Now, this is actually like a call and response. So what's about to happen is a call and response. So like he says, let Israel say his love endures forever. It'd be like if you were like, all the ladies say, all the fellas say, like that kind of thing. That's what's happening right here. So that's what he's doing. So he's saying like, let Israel say, and they're supposed to say like, his love endures forever. And then he says, let the house of Aaron say. And they're supposed to say, his love endures forever. And let those who fear the Lord, this would be everybody, and everybody says, his love endures forever. And then David gives a little bit of his own story. And he says, in my anguish, I cried to the Lord, and he answered me by setting me free. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? The Lord is with me. He is my helper. I will look in triumph on my enemies. These are statements saying this is where I've put my hope. This is where I put my trust. I've put it in the Lord. I'm not putting it on these things of earth. I'm putting it somewhere else. This is where my hope lies. Now, for most of us, this would be a good question of where our hope lies, where it's at right now. And then he comes up with this line, and it's a really fascinating line. But at the end of this, he says, in verse 22, he says this little line. It's just a weird little phrase. It comes out of nowhere. But he says, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Now, this line, we don't know where it comes from. Like, to be honest with you, I've researched this quite a bit. There's really no reason that he uses this line. There's no specific meaning behind it beyond just saying the stone that everyone else didn't want is now the stone that everyone relies on, that everyone rests in. It's a very fascinating line. And really what he's saying, so there's a possibility that he's building the temple at this point, but that's not even maybe what's happening. He just throws this line out there. The stone that nobody else wanted, the stone that was rejected, is now the cornerstone. It's now the one that every other stone relies on, that every other part of us rests in. This is a fascinating line. And it doesn't really come, like we don't really know where it comes from. But it's fascinating to think about this because the last resort stone, the last resort of everything is now the first priority. The last resort is now the first priority. This is now the new priority. Think about this, and this is just what I see all the time. But this is what happens, right? Like this is how life works. It is fascinating to me how many people I sit with and how many people I talk to that when they're at their last resort, suddenly this foundation of God becomes their first priority. It happens all of a sudden. And people will come and like, I mean, you guys know how it goes. Like when you were kids and you were in school, like students, you know how this goes. Like, right, it's the moment you didn't study and suddenly you're like, oh, I need to pray about this. Like this is the moment I need that because I didn't study for this test. Or like, you know how this goes. But I mean, it is fascinating how many people, we try to get this foundation laid when it's almost too late or when it is too late. And what's interesting to me is that many times I feel like people think that they're like flattering God by doing this. Like I sit down with people and they'll be like, so my marriage is on the brink of divorce. And it's almost like they're like, so I think it's time, that I come back to God, to the principles that he's put in place. I think now it's time to do that. And it feels like they're almost like, because it feels like they think they're flattering God. Like I'm doing something so noble and that God's going to be so proud suddenly and everything's going to fall back in place. Everything's going to work. And I would challenge that I think you're frustrating God. I think at that point, like God's like, we've been through this. If we would have started here, we would have had the foundation laid. We wouldn't be here now if we would have done this then. And I think sometimes it's more frustrating than it is flattering to God. And I see this all the time. I will say, I cannot tell you how many people come through our doors and they're here for a short time when things go bad. Things get rough in their life, their marriage, their finances, their friendships, whatever it is, all these things start to fall apart and suddenly they show up in our doors. And they come to me and they're like, oh man, this is what I needed. This is what I need so bad. I need to be here. And then like 3 weeks later, they got it all figured out again and they're gone. And that's fine. I'm not saying like I need you here at the church to grow a church. That's not what I'm worried about is butts in a seat. What I'm worried about is where is your foundation? Because you're going to get your heart broken again. You're going to get your life shattered again. Like you're going to be soul searching again in just a few weeks going, what did I do? Where am I? This foundation is one that you can rest and you can rely on. The one that you've rejected, the one that you've pushed away for so long, that's the one you need to build everything on. That's the one that should be the cornerstone of everything you do. One of the things I think is fascinating is sometimes we take this cornerstone idea or we take this foundation idea and we take this whole thing of like how we should make this foundation upon the life and teachings of Jesus and we move it to just our spiritual lives. Like that's where my spiritual foundation is, but the rest of my life is over here and I do the other things that I want to do. We separate everything else from our spiritual lives. And we're like, yeah, that's my foundation so that when I'm like here on earth, things are good and I can feel good about that. And then it's my foundation. So when I die, I have this get out of hell free card and I get to go to heaven. That's a good thing, but it's only affecting my spiritual life. No, this is a cornerstone upon which you build every part of your life. Because when I sit with people and we talk about their finances falling apart, there's part of me that's like, oh man, Jesus talks like a ton about financial management, like a ton. It's actually the second most thing he talks about. After the kingdom of God, the second thing he talks about is money. When I sit with people and their marriage is falling apart, I'm like, you know what? Jesus taught like a ton about marriage and relationships and purity and how you're supposed to do this. Like that would be good. Or even just relationships, even just friendships and followers or whatever. Jesus talks about this. I mean, these are things that he's talked about, and these are now somehow supposed to be these things that we just kind of sprinkle in when necessary because they've only been part of our spiritual lives. No, the teachings and the life of Jesus is a foundation for every part of your life, not just one. Every part of this life is supposed to be built on that. And so he says this phrase about the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Now this phrase, remember this is a song, so the Psalms are songs. And what happens is this gets sung over and over and over again. It has this line that's just so good that this line actually shows up in the Bible more than it's more than most lines will ever show up in the Bible. It shows up so many times throughout the Bible, this line. It's like they just took this meaning, this phrase, and it's almost like your favorite song that maybe you've had this song sung in different places at different times and it means different things to you at different times. And it's like this song that becomes that, like where it becomes it becomes an important part of the entire Jewish heritage. By singing this song, they remember things, but they also add to the story as they sing it. And this phrase becomes so catchy, it's like this refrain that gets repeated over and over and over again. It's like if I said the first line of this psalm, they would know the rest of it. Like if I said to you, like if I was right now to say like, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, right? You would know that one. Or if I was to say, like, you know, in the famous words of the philosophers of Journey, don't stop believing. Yes, exactly. Or if I said, you are my fire, my one desire. Okay, I knew you were all Backstreet Boy fans. I knew it. I caught you. I knew it. It's like that. I mean, if I said part of it, you would know the rest of it. This became so intrinsic, and it's fascinating how it plays out. This song plays out through the rest of the Bible. And so actually, if you go, you don't have to do this, but what happens is David builds the temple here. And actually, this is like one of the most, right now where we're reading this, is one of the best times in Israel's history. This is one of the best moments that they've ever had. But then they sing this song in the best moments they have. And what's interesting is they also remember this cornerstone in the worst moments they have. If you flip, if you want to, you don't have to, but if you flip back to Ezra chapter 4, this is a fascinating little moment. But what happens is David's temple is built and then it is torn down. It gets broken apart. They lose their kingdom. And suddenly they have to go rebuild this temple. And when they go back to rebuild the temple, it's kind of interesting what happens, because they go back to rebuild the temple, and notice what happens here in verse 10 of Ezra, chapter 3, verse 10. It says, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments with trumpets, and the Levites, sons of Asaph, and the cymbals, they took their places to praise the Lord as prescribed by King David of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord. And the first line of this is the same thing. It says, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. It's the same line as the beginning of Psalm 118. And they sing this song, and it says, all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. The foundation has been laid. They sing the first line of the song. It's very likely that what they sang is the entire song. And they sang in their lowest moment, they sang the same thing that said, even now that things are falling apart, the stone that the builders rejected is our cornerstone. The stone that we forgot about is our cornerstone. The stone that we've walked away from so many times is now, again, our cornerstone. We've come back to that. It's fascinating how this plays out. Even Jesus himself quotes this line. If you go to Luke chapter 20, the temple is now rebuilt. Jesus comes. And when Jesus comes, he shows up and he's teaching in this very temple, the same temple that they just rebuilt. And he has this conversation with the Pharisees. As he's having the Pharisees talk, he tells them some things they don't like. They don't like what he's saying. And he looks at them and they tell him that he's wrong. And they tell him that he may never be right about what he's saying. And he looks at them and it says, Jesus looked directly at them and asked, then what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Jesus is saying, see, you don't agree with what I'm saying. You're not listening to what I'm saying. But let me tell you that I'm the stone that the builders have rejected, but I am also this cornerstone. You might think of me as a last resort, but let me tell you, I think I'm supposed to be the first option. And Jesus himself quotes that. It's actually in 3 of the 4 Gospels. He says that exact line. And then Peter quotes this line later on in Acts. We won't get into that. But Peter used this line at a moment that I think is really important. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of land this in the book of 1 Peter. And so in 1 Peter chapter 2, what we see is this last part. And this is a fascinating part to me. This is where Peter uses this line. It says this in 1 Peter chapter 2. It says in verse 4, as you come to him, the living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into spiritual houses to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Okay, so he takes this moment And this is a really important moment. So let me give you a little bit of backstory on what's happening now. So the temple that Jesus was teaching in is probably at this point being literally burned down again. It's probably being burned to the ground. There's a new emperor in town in Rome. His name was Nero. If you're not familiar with Nero, Nero is one of the most just terrible humans that walked the face of the earth. Nero became the emperor of Rome, and when Nero became the emperor of Rome, he started persecuting Christians. He started killing Christians in the streets. He started having them burned. He would put animal skins on them. He would literally put rope around them with animal skins on them and then send them into the Colosseum with wild animals. So they would be fighting lions or bears or jaguars as they were wearing animal skins. And he would have them defenseless, just running around the Colosseum with these animal skins on. He would then take bodies of Christians and he would burn them at the stake at the city gates of Rome so that everybody could see it. In fact, there's actually some things by some historians that say that he would burn Christians on stakes. He would put them on stakes and he would burn them to be the lights for his dinner parties. So he would have garden parties that the light was these people following Jesus that were being put on stakes. And Nero has taken this Christianity movement, this Jesus movement, and he's spread it all over the place. Now, Peter, who's writing this, has been following Jesus, and Peter is the archbishop or the bishop of Rome at this point. He would have been the guy in charge of the Roman church, the church in Rome. And his church is falling apart. They've lost everything. They've lost all their people. They've lost all their places. Everything is falling apart. In fact, probably at this point, Nero has burned the city to the ground. If you're not familiar with that, Nero burns Rome to the ground. If you ever, like the whole Rome is burning idea, it wasn't just like a Jim Rome show on ESPN a few years ago. Like Rome is burning meant that the city was burning down. And in 64 AD, Nero literally set fire for 5 days in July. I think it was July 18th to July 23rd. In 64 AD, he burned his entire city, his own city that he was the emperor of. He burned it to the ground because he didn't want to have to go to his Senate to get approval to rebuild parts of the city. So he just burned the whole thing to the ground. He burned it all down. And Peter is now writing to people who need hope more than ever. He's writing to people who need this hope because they've lost everything. They've lost loved ones. They've lost possibly spouses. They've definitely lost their finances. They've lost their health. They're now in a place where they don't know what to do. They've lost everything around them. The world is not just shifting, like the world around them is being smashed. And they need something to be reliable. They need something they can rest in. And so Peter writes to them and he uses this phrase about you're all stones being put together to be this holy temple. So the temple's gone. You now are the temple. You now carry the Spirit of God. And in doing so, you're going to be put together. And you're going to have all these stones that are collected, all these parts of your lives that are going to be put together. And your relationships and your marriage and your health and your kids, they're all going to be put onto this thing. And they're good things and they're good stones. But then he says, those are not where it ends. He says, this prophecy from Isaiah, he says, as the scripture says, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. That comes out of the book of Isaiah. But then he says, now to those of you who believe this stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Does that sound familiar? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The stone that you've put off for so long, the stone that you've put off to the side, the stone that you thought was no good, the stone that you only came back to when it was necessary, that stone is supposed to be the stone that you build your entire life on. That all the other stones would rest on it, that they would rely on it. That your hope could be secure because it was on this cornerstone, not on something else. Not on something that's going to fall or fail or falter. It's standing on something that's strong and solid and secure. He's saying that's where your hope's supposed to be. And for some of us in this room right now, Just like they felt in this moment where everything is burning down around them and everything has fallen apart. Maybe you're in that same spot. Maybe there is something in your life right now where you feel like everything is falling apart. Whether it's family, it's relationships, whether it's marriages, whether it's money, whatever it is, there are things in your life right now that might feel like they are falling apart. Everything is burning around you, and you're like, I need something solid. I need something secure. I need something sturdy that I can build my life on. What is it? I would say that stone that maybe has been rejected, in big ways or in small ways, that might be the cornerstone upon which you need to build your entire life. And maybe you're in the spot where you're like, I need something reliable. I would say that's it. But maybe you're here today and you're in the spot where you're like, I need something I can rest in. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're worn out. Maybe you've been trying to hold everything together. This is a cornerstone upon which you can put your hope, and you don't just rely on it, but you can rest on it. Every other stone rests upon this cornerstone. And maybe you're having a hard time finding rest, maybe because you're carrying too much. A couple weeks ago, I was here and we were outside, and my son and I were, there's an old trailer we have out there that holds a few things for the church. And I was carrying some stuff out there, and Oliver and I were walking out together. My son is 7, and he likes to do everything. Like, he's in that spot where he wants to be independent. He wants to do everything. And so we're walking out to the trailer, and I'm carrying this big box of stuff, and it was very heavy. It was real hard to carry. And so I'm carrying it, and we're walking to the trailer, and I'm at that spot where we get there, and it's heavy, but you're at that thing where you're like, I don't want to put it down because then I have to pick it back up. You know what I'm talking about? So you're like, I'll just hold it. And so I'm holding it, and Oliver looks at me, he's like, Dad, I can open the lock. And I was like, can you? And he was like, yeah, I can open it. And I'm like, that'd be great. So I'm just holding the box, and I'm looking at him, and he's fiddling with the lock, and he's fiddling with the lock, and he just keeps fiddling with that lock. And I'm holding this thing that's like real heavy, and I'm holding on to it, and I keep looking at him like, come on, bud, you can do it. And I asked him, I was like, are you okay? And he's like, I got it. And I'm putting, like, literally, I am hoping that he is going to open this thing at any moment. All my hope is on this kid. And I'm like, anytime now, bud. And he's like, I got it, Dad, I got it. And I look, and finally I'm watching him, and the numbers that he's putting into the combination, they're not quite lining up right. And I'm like, bud, just click it into place so that it holds it into place, and then you can, pull the lock. And he was like, I know, Dad, I got it. And he keeps going, and finally it's getting so heavy, and I'm losing hope in him. I'm having a hard time. And I look at the lock, and I ask him, I go, Oliver, do you know the combination? And he goes, no. Oh, that would have been good information to have at the beginning of this. And I'm putting all of my hope in him to do this thing, and I'm making a terrible choice. I should not have been trusting him with this moment. I should not have been hoping in him for this moment. It was a terrible choice. And maybe you've been putting your hope into the wrong things, and here's why. Is because you're carrying too much. And you don't know where else to put your hope anymore. Because you're holding on to so many things. This isn't just a cornerstone to rely on. This is a cornerstone to rest in. And some of you might need a hope that you have that you can finally just find rest. And I would say that if you're in that spot where you're holding too much and you're too tired and there's just too much going on and you're making terrible choices because of how much you're trying to carry, then maybe you're not supposed to carry it all. And maybe you're supposed to put your hope on this cornerstone upon which you can rely and upon which you can rest. So today, maybe you're in one of those places. And if you are, I understand. I would recommend that you maybe start following this reading plan through the book of Mark. I would recommend that you come down and you pray with one of us or meet me in the back room over here, and we'll pray together. I would recommend that you start over. And that as you begin this year, that you find a new foundation, one that you can actually rely on and one that you can rest in. Today you might need that. You might need to start over with that. And we're here to help you with that. If you've never decided that you want Jesus to be the foundation of your life, I think that's a great choice to make. I think that's the place to start. And again, if you want to meet me in the back room, I'd love to talk with you about how to begin that relationship with Jesus and how to find that rest and that reliance upon him. But if you would, let's stand together and let's pray. Father, I thank you for this time. I thank you for this space. I thank you for just a place to come and to hear your word and to understand more about you, to understand more about who you are, and sometimes to understand more about whose we are, to understand what you're doing in our lives and sometimes in through our lives and sometimes in spite of us in our lives. And God, some of us today might be in a place where things are really heavy. Some of us might be in a place today where we just need to be able to rest in you. That you would be the cornerstone of our lives that carries that weight for us. Some of us might be in the place today where we've relied on the wrong things, and whether it's our money, whether it's our relationships, whether it's our kids, whatever the things are that we've put these things on, maybe we've relied in the wrong places. And will we learn to rely on you? If we're in a spot right now where maybe we don't know you, maybe we haven't been following you, maybe we need to start over, God, I pray that we would do that today. That just in this time right now, we would just be honest with you and say, yes, I need to refresh. I need to start over. I need to build this all over again, and I need to build it this time on you, not on shifting sand, not on hope that will fail or will falter, but on a sure, solid, sturdy foundation of you. So I thank you for this time. I thank you for this community that you're building. Just thank you for what you're doing in and through us. I pray you'd be with us as we go into lunch and as we just get to hang out together, get to know one another better. I pray that you'd be with us in our conversations, that you would bless our time and bless the food. Praise things in your name. Amen. Amen. We'll see you over in the other building. Have a great week. And again, if you'd love to pray, I'll be back in this back room. I'd be happy to meet with you. Have a great week.